to be displaced by 2050. We're joined by the Department of Meteorological Services Principal Meteorologist Odisitse George and Global Center for Climate Mobility Deputy Managing Director Sarah Rosengaertner to dissect more emphasis on Botswana's resilience to climate-induced migration. Lady and gent, welcome to the Daybreak.
Good morning.
Good morning. Right, of course, this is a conversation of the century. Of course, we're talking global warming, climate change, and we have seen a lot happening recently, even in Botswana. So I trust and I believe it is pertinent in this time to have this particular conversation. But let's just start with understanding from your side in Botswana what the Climate Mobility Deep Dive Workshop aims to address. What are the challenges that we are looking at? Of course, we just had recent rainfalls that caused flooding in Botswana, but really in the broader picture from your side, what really are we trying to address?
Good morning again. Indeed, as you said, we recently experienced rains that probably we haven't experienced in a long time, which could be some of the impacts that we are seeing every day in terms of the change in climate. And what does that mean in the context of what we are talking about today? People will be forced to move, some maybe permanently, some temporarily. And then this is where now the conversation that we are having today comes in. The Ministry of Environment and Tourism, in partnership with the Global Center for Climate Mobility, it just happens to be engaged in this process of saying, okay, how does climate change affect human movement? And it just happened, I don't know, it's a coincidence, it just so happened to happen at a time that we see as is actual things happening on the ground. And I think this conversation or this partnership comes in at a very opportune time that now gives us an opportunity to explore real situations that are happening on the ground, to be able to, as the ministry responsible for policy side, we are meant to advise government on steps that we can take to counter any of these measures that are happening on the ground. And as such, we hope through this conversation that we are having, through this partnership that we are having with the GCCM, we can be able to go deep into the situations that are happening on the ground, talk to the people that are affected, and then come up with policies and strategies that can inform a decision-making at government level.
Definitely. Well, from what I gather, you're saying you had already had this event in your work plan for the year. And it just so happens that it falls in this time where we're having this alarming incidents happening in our country, and especially here in Gaborone. Right, that's what you were saying.
Yes, definitely.
All right. Climate mobility, we're talking about the displacement of people from places that they've been used to staying in, and they have to relocate, and that displaced in some cases, and it's forced in some cases actually planned. So in what you have seen and what you have seen around the world, and now that you are here in Botswana, the climate mobility hotspots, have you so by far with your engagements prior identified any or seen how vulnerable Botswana could be? We have never thought Botswana could be vulnerable, but from your side or from your expertise, what have you seen by far?
Thank you very much. Botswana is certainly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. I think that is obvious in terms of the water availability issues that the country is grappling with, but also the challenges that we just talked about due to flooding. We heard from workshop participants quite a lot about the disease burden that increases due to some of these impacts, the increased heat. Our work really focuses on what do some of these impacts mean for people, their lives, and where they want to and can live in the future. So we're working with future projections, doing modeling to look at how might future climate developments and the development trajectory of countries, how might that impact the areas of the country that will be more or less livable, more or less attractive to people. And what we see in Botswana is that the country is already very urbanized. So a lot of the dynamics are really around the urban centers. Some cities projected to gain population, other cities projected to see people move out, even if they're overall still gaining population. And that, for example, is an indicator that the climatic conditions will probably be degrading in those places, even though people obviously still live there. And that for the government means you really have to look at what are some of the measures you can put in place to maintain livable conditions, even as climate impacts become more severe in certain parts. So we see dynamics here in Botswana really play out around Maun, Gaborone, Kanye, Francistown. Those are all big, obviously, hubs, and at the same time they are also projected to see these population shifts over the coming decades.
Right. I like the fact that at the moment we're talking about projections, right? It is what we're expecting in the coming years. But in terms of preparedness, how prepared do you think Botswana are in that regard? Do you think we are ready to be displaced? Do you think we're ready to plan our own relocations?
I don't know if we are ready, but I guess our role is to inform the people so that they can make decisions that are informed by data, by statistics. In terms of our response as the ministry, we have a policy and a climate change policy that was adopted by Parliament in 2021. And in there, one of the key chapters is the chapter on human settlements under the adaptation chapter. Adaptation basically means, in this context, we accept that our situation is changing, our climate is changing, and then how are we going to do things differently in order for us to be able to adapt and be able to live with these new conditions. So the chapter on adaptation and particularly human settlements talks to interventions that we can do to counter or as a response measure to this. The question that you're asking now of, I don't think our people are ready. I guess now it's our role to go out there, and I guess part of what we'll be doing through these engagements that we have coming up this next 3 weeks, we'll be going around the country, again getting feedback from people from what they are experiencing on the ground, and then being able to give them feedback of what the data is saying, and then that interaction should help at least Botswana be informed of what is coming up, and for them to make decisions whether they move or they change how they build their houses, or they change certain things, basically, of how they do their everyday things.
Now, I like the fact that you mentioned policies, right? Are there any policy gaps that have been hindering the process or even of information dissemination, maybe in some cases? Are there any policy gaps that need to be addressed? Maybe through such engagement platforms, some could come up as those gaps that are really hindering the facilitation of effectively managing climate change in Botswana.
I think the key gap, as you know, climate change is a cross-cutting issue. Right. So you might be the focal ministry, but then at implementation level, everybody else has to be involved. I think the main gap that is there is like getting information to those who are on the ground for them to be able to respond appropriately. And that's one gap we have to work very hard at trying to fill, to make sure that whatever policies, whatever programs we have on the ground, whether part of the government everyday things or in partnership with our colleagues, like now we have GCCM, we have to make sure that those policies or programs, interventions, reach the right people.
Right. Thank you so much for clarifying it like that. Now, with 30,000 people projected to be displaced by 2030, what concrete adaptation strategies will be discussed or will be suggested, will be proposed, especially for Botswana in this engagement session that will be ongoing?
So I think they were looking, on the one hand, again, towards the future and how can people prepare. And so we're really working with this notion of adaptation journeys. How can communities start thinking about their adaptation journey? So I think even having that conversation around progressively worse impacts and what that might mean for them helps them wrap their minds around, okay, what are the implications for our livelihoods? What are the implications for the way we, as my colleague mentioned, the way we build our homes, the way we farm? But then obviously we're also interested, and that's why we're doing these consultations, into what are people already doing? How are they already adjusting? Whether it's new crops, whether it's new ways of capturing water perhaps, whether it's new ways of building homes and trying to make them less prone to being flooded. So we're already also gathering information on what are some of the practices that people are already putting in place. To better understand, okay, are there things that are working well that could be scaled up, for example? And we're working with a funding mechanism called the Communities Climate Adaptation Facility, with the idea really of also putting some money towards community-based solutions. So these are not large funds, but this is to help communities put into place measures that they already see working for themselves, and where they can, with relatively little bureaucratic effort, make changes that will make them more resilient now, but with this idea of, at the same time, really planning for the future with support from government.
Right. I actually want to ask you this question, that with your experience with different countries, with different areas and in different seasons, and now yourself being here in Botswana, really in comparison terms, how fast or how efficiently or how fast, how really can we get there when you look at the look of things right now, where we are right now as Botswana? How fast and how quickly can we get to that point where we're saying really we're getting there in terms of responding well to climate change, we're getting there in terms of adaptation?
I think Botswana has the advantage that the numbers are not huge. You don't have huge numbers of displaced persons that you have to cater to or care for and protect. And you have, good state capacity to put measures in place. And I think those are really two good conditions to think strategically about adaptation also as an opportunity. Of course, it's first of all a threat and something that you have to look at. How do we protect people from negative impacts? But at the same time, climate adaptation could also be an opportunity to look at what are some of the new technologies, the new ways of doing things, where Botswana could really lead the way. And I think there's opportunity for the government to work with other stakeholders in the country, whether it's private sector, whether it's universities, whether it's young people, to look at, okay, water is a challenge for us. How could we be the hub for coming with good water solutions and really make Botswana the place where water solutions are born? How do we make the fact that we have this large urbanization dynamic, how do we make this part of our DNA to really become a hub for urban expertise and urban planning and urban economic development? So I think there is obviously a challenge here, but there's also an opportunity for Botswana to mobilize and to focus on specific solutions and how it can grow new ecosystems and industries around those.
Right. Thank you so much. I think as we round up our conversation, coming back to you, Mr. Keotsene, maybe you can share with us the best practices and best lessons that Botswana can really adopt with the challenges that we're going through and other countries facing similar ones. Really, what should we prepare for, as in like an opportunity for us to say to Botswana, this is the direction in which we're getting?
Thank you again. I think the best first thing that we should be doing is to be informed, because people normally say, it's like, hey, we have very good programs for the most part, but then people tend not to know what is available to them. And part of what we are doing again as the department and the ministry is to scale up that information dissemination process, so that people in their everyday living, they know what sort of things are coming up, these challenges that we are talking about, what possible solutions are available, what partnerships can we form to be able to, as a community again, to be able to be resilient, basically, to these changes that are happening.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sarah Rosengaertner and Odisitse George. And of course, we're wishing well best practices, best results, a policy filling of those gaps that we spoke about in our conversation. But thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you.